One wrong decision changed everything. Just look at this. Fofana carries the ball and drives forward. He has two clear passing options, Garnacho to his left and Pedro to his right. Instead, he holds onto the ball for too long. Gordon wins possession, Newcastle break instantly, attack Chelsea's backline, and score the opener. Now let's take a closer look at the tactical analysis of Newcastle versus Chelsea at St. James Park, where Chelsea were forced to settle for a 2-2 draw. Enzo Maresca set his team up in a 4-2-3-1 formation, while Eddie Howe lined his men up in a 4-3-3 formation. When Newcastle were in possession, they consistently looked to build up from the back using a 3-2 structure. Cher and Thiaw split wide, forming a back three with goalkeeper Ramsdale, who acted as the spare man to invite Chelsea's first line of pressure. Hall inverted into midfield to form a double pivot alongside Tonali, while Miley positioned himself higher and wider on the left to pin Chelsea's full back and stretch the defensive line horizontally. This structure had a clear purpose. With Hall moving inside, it allowed Ramsey and Guimarães to drift into the half spaces between Chelsea's midfield and defensive lines. Gordon and Murphy stayed wide and high, fixing Chelsea's fullbacks and preventing them from stepping inside to help centrally. This spacing created multiple passing lanes and constantly forced Chelsea's midfield into difficult defensive decisions. Tonali played a key role in Newcastle's progression. He regularly dropped slightly deeper than Hall to receive on the half-turn, break Chelsea's first line with vertical carries, and switch play when Chelsea overcommitted on one side. Out of Newcastle's midfield trio, he was the most reliable ball carrier and progressive passer, often dictating the tempo of Newcastle's build-up. Eddie Howe's idea was very clear. By positioning Ramsey and Guimarães in the half spaces, Newcastle dragged Chelsea's double pivot away from central zones. This opened up direct vertical passing lanes from the defensive line into the striker. With central space appearing, Voltemade repeatedly dropped between the lines to receive under minimal pressure, link play, and set the ball wide for advancing runners. In this sequence, Thiaw bypasses Chelsea's midfield entirely with a straight pass into Voltemade, as both Caicedo and James are pulled wide by the movements of Ramsey and Guimarães. To disrupt Newcastle's build-up, Chelsea adopted a man-oriented pressing scheme. Palmer and João were tasked with jumping onto Newcastle's center-backs as soon as they received possession, aiming to force play wide. James closely followed Tonali, preventing him from turning or carrying the ball forward freely. Because Hall inverted into midfield, Pedro was instructed to track Ramsey whenever James stepped out of position. Caicedo stayed tight to Guimarães, Gusto pressed aggressively onto Gordon, and Cucurella matched Murphy on the opposite flank, while Fofana and Chalobah remained focused on Voltemade's movements between the lines. However, Newcastle repeatedly exploited the weaknesses of Chelsea's man-to-man press. By constantly rotating positions and making counter-movements, they dragged Chelsea's players out of their defensive shape. This opened central passing lanes and created time and space for Voltemade to drop in, receive, and quickly release the ball to Newcastle's wide attackers. When Chelsea's center-backs stepped out to block these passing routes, they exposed space in behind for third-man runs from Ramsey, Guimarães, or Gordon. As a result, Newcastle were able to progress the ball with control, manipulate Chelsea's defensive structure, and sustain pressure for long spells. For much of the first half, Chelsea struggled to regain compactness, and Newcastle looked the more dominant and cohesive side. In the first half, Chelsea's build-up was repeatedly disrupted by Newcastle's aggressive and well-coordinated pressing structure. The moment Chelsea tried to play out from the back, Newcastle reacted with intensity, pressing high and attempting to either regain possession immediately or force a rush decision. As soon as Fofana stepped onto the ball, Newcastle triggered their press. Gordon curved his run to close Fofana while blocking the passing lane inside. Voltemade jumped onto Chalobah to prevent a safe switch, and Murphy pressed Cucurella on the far side. At the same time, Newcastle's midfield locked onto Chelsea's central options. James and Caicedo were tightly man-marked, removing all central passing angles and isolating the ball carrier. This man-oriented approach left Chelsea with no progressive options through the middle, forcing them into low-percentage long balls toward the front line. Newcastle's backline was well set to deal with these aerial duels, allowing them to quickly regain possession and sustain pressure. Recognizing that the problem was not the tactical structure but the player profiles within it, Enzo Maresca opted to change personnel rather than shape. Using Malo Gusto in the right half space during build-up offered minimal attacking value, particularly in a game where Chelsea struggled to establish rhythm and control. Chelsea needed a player who could receive under pressure, connect play, and make decisive actions between the lines. As a result, Maresca introduced Enzo Fernández into that zone, with Reece James dropping back into his natural right-back position to provide defensive security and a more traditional outlet in build-up. This adjustment significantly altered Newcastle's pressing dynamics. With Enzo now operating higher up the pitch, Newcastle could no longer press with the same aggression. Their midfield line was forced to drop deeper to track both Enzo and Palmer, who were now occupying the half spaces simultaneously. This stretched the vertical compactness of Newcastle's press and created larger gaps between their midfield and defensive lines. The change also improved Chelsea's ability to compete for second balls. When Sanchez was forced to go long, Enzo and Palmer were positioned closer to João Pedro, allowing Chelsea to contest knockdowns and loose balls more effectively. Enzo's positioning also freed Palmer to drop deeper into midfield phases, where he could dictate play, link transitions, and then arrive late into the box during attacking sequences. As Enzo, Caicedo, and Palmer rotated intelligently, dropping, pushing forward, and exchanging positions, Chelsea gradually removed the midfield superiority Newcastle enjoyed earlier in the match. What had been a clear Newcastle advantage in central areas became a more even 3 versus 3 battle, giving Chelsea greater stability and control, especially in second phase possession. Chelsea were at their most dangerous in transition, exploiting the space Newcastle left behind when their press was broken. This eventually led to the equaliser. Following a Newcastle attack, Sanchez made a save and immediately initiated the counter with a quick, long distribution. João Pedro isolated Thiaw in a foot race, used his strength and timing to beat the defender, and then showed composure to round the goalkeeper and finish. It was a moment that perfectly highlighted Chelsea's improved transitional threat and punished Newcastle's aggressive approach. In the end, this was a game decided by tactical detail, intensity, and in-game adaptation. Newcastle's aggressive man-oriented press and intelligent use of the half spaces gave them control for large periods, especially in the first half, where they consistently disrupted Chelsea's build-up and forced errors. Eddie Howe's side executed their game plan with clarity, using rotations and direct vertical passes to exploit Chelsea's structure and create transitional opportunities. However, Enzo Maresca's willingness to adjust personnel rather than system proved decisive. By introducing Enzo Fernández into advanced central areas, Chelsea were able to regain midfield balance, win second balls, and threaten Newcastle in transition. The shift turned the midfield battle into a more even contest and allowed Chelsea to play higher up the pitch. In the end, the 2-2 draw reflected a match where both sides imposed their tactical ideas at different moments, canceling each other out over 90 minutes. If you enjoyed this tactical breakdown of Newcastle versus Chelsea, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. Let me know in the comments what you think of Maresca's in-game changes and who impressed you the most on the pitch. This has been Tactical Analysis. I'll see you in the next breakdown.